Good evening. It is a privilege to welcome you back to this quiet space, where the grand, noisy epics of history fall silent, and the hushed, forgotten stories are given leave to speak. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find value in these journeys into the past. And do let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It is always a privilege to know who is joining us from around the world. Now, find a comfortable position, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's chronicle together. Our journey tonight takes us behind the high, vermilion walls of the Forbidden City, a place of dragon thrones, whispered secrets, and absolute power. It was a universe unto itself, sealed off from the rest of the world, operating on its own rhythms of ceremony and fear. Here, at the very heart of the Celestial Empire, lived a figure as iconic, as feared, and as profoundly misunderstood as any in history: the Palace Eunuch. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the noise of your world fade away, and allow the image of this man to form in the quiet theater of your mind. What do you see? Perhaps you see him standing as a silent sentinel just outside the Emperor's private chambers. A powerful general, a man who has conquered provinces and seen horrors you cannot imagine, must bow his head and await this figure's permission to enter. The eunuch's face is a mask of serene indifference, his eyes holding a deep, unreadable knowledge. He is the ultimate gatekeeper, the first and last line of defense for the Son of Heaven. Picture him gliding through the opulent halls, his soft-soled slippers making no sound on the polished stone floors. His robes are not merely fine, they are woven from the finest silk, perhaps in a shade of imperial yellow gifted by the Emperor himself, a color forbidden to all others. The embroidery is a masterpiece of intricate needlework, a coiling dragon with eyes of spun gold thread, a symbol of the power he serves and reflects. He is a living work of art, a testament to the aesthetic perfection of the court. Imagine him not just as a servant, but as a connoisseur. In his imagined private quarters, away from the throne, he practices calligraphy, his brush flowing with a dancer's grace. He plays the gu qin, its somber notes echoing in a moonlit courtyard. He is a man of culture, discussing poetry with the Emperor, his intellect as sharp as any scholar's in the realm. His taste is so refined that he is given charge of the imperial workshops, overseeing the creation of priceless lacquerware and porcelain that will be coveted for centuries. Now, imagine the secrets he carries. He is the filter through which all information passes to the Emperor. He reads the petitions from distant governors, and his subtle emphasis in a summary may determine whether a region receives aid or is left to starve. He stands silently behind a carved screen during a meeting of the Grand Council, his presence officially unacknowledged, but his memory recording every word, every subtle hesitation. He overhears the desperate pleas of concubines and the bitter complaints of princes. He knows who is in favor and who is in disgrace, who is loyal and who is plotting. He is the central nervous system of the empire, a confidant who has traded his manhood for a life of unparalleled intimacy with power itself. You might see a life of immense luxury, a world beyond the comprehension of the common man, while millions outside the walls subsist on meager bowls of rice and millet. He dines on the exquisite leftovers from the imperial table. Delicacies like shark's fin soup, tender bamboo shoots, and peaches so rare they are considered symbols of immortality. He lives within the sprawling grandeur of the palace, a city of sweeping golden roofs, tranquil gardens where fantastically shaped rocks rise from still ponds, and halls filled with priceless porcelain and jade. He is feared, he is respected, he is untouchable, protected by his absolute loyalty and proximity to the divine emperor. He has made the ultimate sacrifice, and in return, he has received a life of influence and comfort that others can only dream of. This is the image we have been sold, a picture of cunning, of power, of a difficult choice leading to an extraordinary reward. It is an image of a man who has transcended his unfortunate state to become something more. It is a profound and comforting lie. It is a story we tell ourselves because the reality is too grim to easily accept. So I ask you to take that image, the powerful courtier, the silken robes, the serene calligrapher, the life of secret influence, and hold it in your mind one last moment. Feel its weight, its beauty, its power. Now, let it burn. Let it turn to ash and drift away on a cold wind. Because the truth is not found in the throne room, but in a dark, dusty hut far from the palace walls. The truth of the Palace Eunuch is not written in edicts of power, but in a small, sealed porcelain jar containing the withered, horrifying proof of his mutilation. His story begins not with a whisper of influence, but with a boy's terrified scream, and a choice made not by him, but by a family so broken by starvation, they would sacrifice their son's future for a handful of grain. That cultured connoisseur you pictured, calmly assessing a Ming Dynasty vase? Erase him. See instead a small, illiterate boy from a remote village whose only knowledge of art is the shape of the cracks in his family's empty rice bowl. See a child who has never known a full stomach, being led on a long, terrifying journey to the capital, his mind unable to grasp the finality of what is about to happen. That untouchable, silken robe you pictured, imagine it gone. In its place is the coarse, scratchy tunic of a novice, a boy whose primary duty is to haul buckets of human waste and scrub the filth from his master's chamber pot. The delicate hand that played the guqin. See it now, red and raw from harsh lye soap, the fingernails broken, the knuckles swollen from the dull ache of yesterday's beating for a minor mistake. The opulent halls were not a home, but a prison of endless menial labor. The whispers were not of power, but of gut-wrenching paranoia. For every eunuch who advised an emperor, 1,000 more navigated a brutal, violent hierarchy of their own, a snake pit of rivalries where a shared meal could be a test of loyalty and a kind word could be a trap. The serene, indifferent mask was a necessary lie, hiding a soul in constant turmoil. And the body you imagined, gliding gracefully through the palace, it was a site of perpetual war, a body in rebellion, often plagued by chronic pain, lifelong incontinence, and the deep, unshakable shame that came with it. It was a condition that no amount of perfume could hide, earning him the silent, contemptuous pity of the very palace maids he supervised. Even the respect he was shown was a poisoned chalice. The bowing officials despised him, seeing him as an unnatural creature, a political cancer. Their deference was a mask for a deep-seated revulsion. He was utterly alone. The ultimate, most brutal irony of his existence was his role as a guardian. He was the protector of the imperial harem, the man tasked with ensuring the purity of the emperor's bloodline. He was surrounded by wives, concubines, and the laughter of endless children. He was the steward of the family, a man who could never have one of his own. His entire life was a testament to a future that was violently stolen from him, a ghost doomed to haunt the very concept of lineage. Forget the tales of cunning and influence. Forget the image of the shadow ruler. The true story of the eunuch is written in the searing pain of the surgeon's knife, the quiet humiliation of his body's betrayal, and the hollow echo in his soul where a future was meant to be. That searing pain, that hollow echo in the soul, it does not begin within the glittering, treacherous halls of the Forbidden City. It does not begin with the conspiracies of the court or the whims of an emperor. It begins much further away, in a place of dirt and wind and silence, under a vast and unforgiving sky. To understand the man the eunuch would become, we must first understand the world that the boy was forced to leave behind. A world where the choice was never between happiness and sadness, but between a slow, collective death and a single, desperate gamble. Picture a village in the northern plains of China. The season does not matter, for the hardship is perennial. If it is summer, the sun is a merciless hammer, baking the fields into a cracked and barren mosaic. The riverbed is a skeleton of bleached stones, the memory of water long since vanished. If it is winter, the wind is a blade, slicing down from the steppes, finding every crack in the thin mud walls of the peasants' huts. The cold is not just a sensation. It is a physical presence, a thief that steals the warmth from sleeping children and the strength from old men's bones. This is a land that has given up its generosity. The soil, worked for 1,000 years, is tired. It yields only meager crops of millet and wheat, and only then if the rains decide to fall. This year, they did not. The stalks in the fields are stunted and brittle, their heads empty of the grain that means life. The landscape is painted in shades of brown and grey, a world drained of its colour and its hope. In this village, in one of 100 identical huts, a family is slowly starving. Let us sit with them for a moment, in the deepening twilight. The father has spent the day toiling on land that is not his, in return for a share of a harvest that has failed. His hands are a testament to his life. The palms are like worn leather, the knuckles swollen, the fingernails packed with the same useless, dusty soil he has tried to coax into sustenance. His face, etched with lines of worry, is turned towards the small smoky fire that does little to warm the single cramped room. The mother moves with a quiet, practiced economy of motion, her own hunger a familiar ache she has long since learned to ignore. Her task is the cruelest of all, the daily mathematics of impossible division. She ladles a thin, watery gruel into a few chipped earthenware bowls, knowing that the small sack of millet in the corner must last another week, another month. She knows it is an impossible task. Every night, she performs this ritual of managed starvation, giving a little more to the children, a little less to herself, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Their existence is not a matter of simple misfortune. It is a carefully constructed trap. The land they work belongs to a wealthy official in a distant city, a man they have never seen. A portion of their non-existent harvest is already promised to him as rent. Another portion is owed to the emperor in taxes, a debt that must be paid regardless of flood or drought. To survive last winter, the father had to borrow a small amount of grain from a local merchant, a loan whose interest has grown so large it can never be repaid. They are bound to this land, to this cycle of debt, by invisible chains as strong as any iron. To run would be to become a bandit or a beggar, a fate perhaps even swifter and more brutal. They are not just poor, they are powerless. It is into this profound silence of despair that a new sound enters, a story, a rumor. It is carried by a traveling merchant, or perhaps a cousin who has returned from the city, his clothes threadbare but his eyes wide with things he has seen. He speaks of the capital of Beijing. He speaks of the Forbidden City. He does not speak of it as a seat of power, a place of politics and intrigue. To the starving peasants of the village, his description is of something far more fundamental. It is a myth, a legend. He speaks of a place where the emperor's table is so laden with food that entire dishes are left untouched. A place where thousands of servants are housed and fed, their rice bowls always full. A place where the kitchens burn day and night, where there is always warmth, always shelter from the wind. He speaks of the Palace Eunuchs. He speaks of the boys from villages just like this one who were sent away, and who now, it is said, send money home to their families. Enough money to buy grain, to pay off debts, to survive. The story hangs in the cold air of the hut long after the visitor has gone. It is a seed of an idea, a monstrous, unnatural idea, but it takes root in the fertile soil of desperation. The parents look at each other, and then they look at their sons, huddled together for warmth. And the terrible calculus begins. It is not a spoken negotiation. It is a conversation held in glances, in sighs, in the long, sleepless hours of the night. It is a calculation of survival. One life, brutalized and sacrificed, in exchange for the lives of all the others. The continuation of the family line, that sacred duty, in exchange for the end of one small branch of it. It is a choice that shreds the soul, a perversion of every parental instinct. To choose a son to be sent into this unknown horror is an act of love and an act of violence, inextricably intertwined. Finally, the unspoken decision is made. The chosen boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, does not understand the complexities of the choice. He cannot comprehend the concepts of courtly life, of servitude, of castration. He understands only that his parents are crying. He understands that a stranger has come to take him away. He understands the final, desperate hug from his mother, the way she presses a small, cold rice ball into his hand. He understands the sight of his father turning away, his shoulders shaking. His departure from the village is not the beginning of an adventure. It is an erasure. He is taken from the only world he has ever known, a world of hardship, yes, but also of familiarity, of family. He is led away down a dusty road, a small, silent figure, his mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He is already a ghost, caught between a life that is over and a fate he cannot begin to imagine. The hollow echo has already begun to form in his soul. The dusty road, after days or perhaps weeks of walking, finally ends. The journey, a blur of unfamiliar landscapes and the cold indifference of strangers, does not conclude before the gleaming, dragon-crested gates of the Forbidden City, as the boy might have vaguely imagined. It leads to a small, dark hut, tucked away in a forgotten, foul-smelling alley of Beijing. This is the place where boys are unmade, and where new lives of a different, stranger kind begin. This is the workshop of a man known simply as a cutter, or a Daofang Shifu. He is not a physician or a priest. He is a tradesman, a specialist in a grim and narrow field. His profession has been passed down through his family for generations, a body of knowledge built on blood and pain. When the boy is brought before him, the cutter's eyes are not cruel, but appraising. He assesses the boy's health, his resilience, his likelihood of survival, with the same detached professionalism a carpenter might use to judge a piece of wood. The boy is not a child to him. He is raw material. His survival is a matter of professional pride, and more importantly, of payment. The fee for his services was often contingent on the boy living through the ordeal. The boy is led inside, and the door closes, shutting out the meager light of the alley. The room is small and dim, illuminated only by a single flickering oil lamp and the weak sunlight filtering through a grimy paper window. The air is thick with a strange, heavy scent, a mixture of stale incense, dried herbs, and another coppery, metallic smell that the boy's mind cannot and does not want to identify. There is no sign of medical science here. There is no gleaming marble or sterilized equipment. The floor is hard-packed earth. In the center of the room stands a low, sturdy wooden table, its surface dark and stained with the history of its use. On a dirty cloth beside it, the tools of the trade are laid out with a practiced neatness. There is a roll of rough cloth bandages, a pot of what looks like ash or a dark paste, and the primary instrument, a short, curved knife, its blade honed to a razor's edge. Its shape is somewhere between a farmer's sickle and a surgeon's scalpel. It is a tool designed for one purpose, and one purpose only. The boy, trembling, is given no time to process his surroundings. The cutter's assistants, strong men with blank, impassive faces, move with a swift and practiced efficiency. The boy's thin, worn clothes are roughly stripped from his body. He is lifted onto the table, his naked skin recoiling from the cold, hard wood. His protests are weak, his struggles futile. His legs are forced apart, and his arms are pulled above his head. Then, the cloth bandages are used not for healing, but for binding. They are wrapped tightly around his limbs, pinning him to the table, rendering him utterly immobile and helpless. He is spread out like an offering, a sacrifice to the terrible god of survival. When he is secured, a moment of strange, formal ritual intrudes upon the brutality. The cutter leans over him, his face close. He speaks in a calm, low voice, asking the question that tradition demands. Will you regret this? The boy can barely draw breath, his heart hammering against his ribs, his mind a universe of pure terror. But he knows what he must say. The answer has been coached into him. It is the final password to his new life. Through chattering teeth, he whispers, "No." The word, barely audible, hangs in the thick air. It is the last moment of the boy he was. With his consent given, the final preparations are made. There is no anesthetic, no wine to dull the senses, no opium to send the mind to a distant, hazy place. The pain is to be endured. It is part of the process, part of the test. The assistants hold him down, their weight pressing on his shoulders and legs, their hands like iron vices. The cutter takes the knife. What happens next is a moment outside of time, an eternity of pure, physical violation. There is a flash of sharpened steel in the lamplight. There is a single, swift, practiced motion. And then there is only pain. It is not a pain that can be described. It is a blinding, white-hot agony that detonates from the center of his body, eclipsing all thought, all feeling, all sense of self. It is a fire that consumes his entire being, a force so absolute, it is as if the universe has been distilled into a single point of unbearable sensation. A scream is torn from his lungs, a raw animal sound of a creature being torn apart. In that one fluid, devastating movement, the cutter has severed everything, the penis and the testicles, all removed in a single scoop. The boy's entire future, his ability to have a wife, to have children, to continue his family line, to be a man in the way his society understood it, is gone. Excised, wiped from existence. But the procedure is not over. The boy is now in a state of shock, his body convulsing, his mind adrift in a red sea of pain. The assistants work quickly, efficiently. The bleeding is staunched with a poultice of ash and herbs, a crude and unhygienic method that seals the wound while simultaneously introducing a host of potential infections. Then comes the most delicate and dangerous part. A small, smooth plug, often made of pewter, silver, or a goose quill. is carefully inserted into his urethra. This tiny object is the key to his survival. It is the only thing preventing the urinary canal from healing shut, a complication that would mean certain, agonizing death in the days to come. Finally, the gaping wound is bandaged tightly with the rough cloth. The bindings on his limbs are untied. The boy, now limp and whimpering, is lifted from the table. His body is no longer his own. It is a vessel of pain, a site of mutilation, a thing that has been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. He has survived the knife, but many did not. The shock to the system, the sheer trauma of the event, was often enough to stop a young boy's heart. The blood loss could be immense and fatal. This first brutal step was a filter, and only the strongest, or perhaps the luckiest, passed through it. The cutter has performed his task. The boy has been unmade. Now, a new and even more perilous struggle begins, the struggle to live. The boy is carried from the blood-stained table, his world a haze of pain and shock, and laid upon a simple straw mat in a corner of the hut. Here, in this dimly lit room, the second act of his ordeal begins. It is not a battle of a single searing moment, but a slow, grinding war fought over 3 days and 3 nights against his own body. His life, having been irrevocably altered, now hangs by the thinnest of threads, and his only task is to endure. The room he is in is a small purgatory, a waiting room between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He is not alone. On other mats around him lie other boys, all recent survivors of the cutter's knife, each locked in his own private universe of suffering. The air is heavy and stagnant, thick with the smell of blood, sweat, and the foul, sweetish stench of festering wounds. The only sounds are the soft, desperate whimpers of pain that the boys are too weak to suppress, and the occasional feverish muttering of a mind lost in delirium. There is no comfort here, only the grim companionship of shared agony. His first and most formidable enemy is thirst. Following the procedure, he is strictly forbidden from drinking any liquid. Not a sip of water, not a drop of tea. This cruel denial is a practical measure designed to prevent urination, which could introduce infection to the raw, open wound and wash away the cauterizing ash. For 3 full days, he must endure a state of forced dehydration. It is a unique and profound form of torture. The constant, searing pain from his wound is now paired with a desperate, primal craving that slowly eclipses all else. His lips crack and split. His tongue feels thick and swollen, a dry piece of wood in his mouth. His throat is a desert of sandpaper. He dreams of water, of streams, of rain. He can think of nothing else. Every instinct in his body screams for relief, but none is given. This trial is not just a physical hardship. It is a lesson in control, a brutal introduction to a life that will be defined by the denial of natural urges. As if this were not enough, he is not allowed the mercy of lying still. Several times a day, the cutter's assistants enter the room. They come to him, and with the same impassive strength they used to hold him down, they force him to his feet. The act of standing sends a fresh explosion of fire through his wounded body. Every muscle screams in protest. He is weak from blood loss, dizzy from dehydration, but he is made to walk. Leaning on the assistants, he must take slow, shuffling, excruciating steps around the small room. This mandated movement is another grim necessity, meant to keep his blood circulating and prevent his body from succumbing to a fatal stupor. Each step is an agony, a fresh wave of nausea and pain that threatens to pull him under. He is a ghost being forced to haunt his own cell. His only motivation, the fear of the men beside him. This is his second lesson. His body is no longer a vessel for his own comfort or will, but an instrument that must perform its duty, no matter the cost. Throughout these 3 days, an invisible enemy stalks the room. Infection. With the unhygienic conditions of the surgery, it is not a risk. It is a near certainty. The boy feels it begin as a deep, throbbing heat in his wound, a heat that has nothing to do with the warmth of the room. It radiates outwards, a poison seeping into his blood. Then comes the fever. He is plunged into a disorienting world of shivering chills that leave him trembling uncontrollably, followed by waves of sweat that soak his thin mat. He drifts in and out of consciousness, his sleep filled with terrifying, delirious nightmares. He sees the faces of his family, the fields of his village, the flash of the knife, all swirling together in a terrifying phantasmagoria. He is acutely aware of the other boys around him. He hears when one boy's whimpering fades into a rattling gasp, and then into silence. He sees the assistants wrap the small, still body in a straw mat and carry it out of the room without ceremony. Each silent departure is a stark reminder of how close he is to that same edge, how easily his own thread might be cut. He is in a race against the infection that is crawling through his veins. At the end of the 3rd day, the trial reaches its climax. The cutter returns. The boy, weak and barely lucid, is once again held down. The moment of truth has arrived. With a steady hand, the cutter removes the bandages and then, with a small pair of forceps, he carefully pulls the pewter plug from the boy's urethra. A deep, profound silence falls over the small group. Everything hangs on what happens next. The boy, his body a knot of terror and pain, is commanded to urinate. He must summon the will from the depths of his exhausted being. If he cannot, it means the canal has swollen or healed shut. His fate would be sealed, a slow, agonizing death as his own body poisoned itself. He strains, his entire being focused on this single, desperate act. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a thin, hesitant stream begins. It is a torrent of fire, an excruciating, burning sensation on the raw, damaged tissue that makes him cry out in renewed agony. But it is the most beautiful agony he has ever known. It is the feeling of life. It is the signal that he has survived. But the jar's ultimate significance transcended the psychological and entered the realm of the eternal. In the spiritual beliefs of the time, the integrity of the body was essential for the integrity of the soul in the afterlife. It was profoundly believed that to be reborn as a whole person, a eunuch had to be buried with his treasures. When he died, the jar had to be placed in the coffin with him, symbolically rejoining the body so that his spirit could pass into the next world complete. This belief transformed the bow from a painful reminder into an object of desperate spiritual hope. It was his only ticket to salvation. To lose the jar was a catastrophe beyond measure. If it were stolen or destroyed, he faced a terror far worse than death. The prospect of an eternity spent as a mutilated, wandering ghost, forever incomplete, forever excluded from the cycle of rebirth. This added a layer of constant, low-grade fear to his existence. His most traumatic memory was also his most cherished possession, the key to his professional life, and his eternal soul resting in the same terrible object. And so, we see the final, tragic paradox of this brutal transaction. The eunuch's life was bound to the very thing that had been violently taken from him. He was forced to cherish the evidence of his own mutilation. The source of his deepest trauma was also the source of his only hope. This small jar of withered flesh and bone was his past, his present, and his future. It was the price of his entry into a life of service, and his only hope for a peaceful exit into the next. It was the ultimate symbol of a life built upon a foundation of profound and irreconcilable loss. Having passed through the crucible of the cutter's hut, the boy, now officially a eunuch, is finally brought to the place that has dominated his family's desperate dreams, the Forbidden City. He clutches the jar containing his treasures, the gruesome price of his admission, and steps through a side gate into a world beyond his comprehension. The scale of it is the first thing that assaults his senses. He has spent his life in a small village of mud huts and dusty paths. Now, he stands in a vast stone courtyard, so wide it seems to hold the sky itself. The walls are a deep, imposing vermilion. The roofs of the great halls curve gracefully towards the heavens. Their tiles are brilliant, shimmering imperial yellow, a color he has never seen before. The air smells different here, cleaner, sharper, tinged with the scent of pine incense and ancient cypress wood. For a fleeting moment, the boy is paralyzed by a profound sense of awe. This is the center of the world. Surely, a life here, no matter the cost, must be better than the one he left behind. This fragile hope, the last ember of his childhood imagination, is extinguished almost immediately. He is not welcomed as a new resident. He is processed as a new piece of inventory. He is led to a small, severe-looking office where a wizened, older eunuch sits behind a dark wooden desk, his face a roadmap of long-held authority. Without a word, the boy presents his jar. The old eunuch inspects it with a bored, clinical eye, makes a note in a ledger with a flick of his brush, and then dismisses it, and him, with a wave of his hand. The boy has been registered. He now officially belongs to the imperial household. He is then taken from the office and handed over to another senior eunuch. This man will be his shifu, his master. The boy, remembering the stories of masters and disciples, might have a fleeting hope for a guide, a mentor to teach him the ways of this strange new world. One look at the man's face dispels this notion entirely. The shifu's expression is not one of kindness, but of stern impatience. His eyes are hard, assessing the boy not as a person, but as a burden and a tool. This is the man who now owns his labor, his time, and his immediate future. The boy quickly learns that he has not joined a brotherhood of shared suffering. He has been inducted into a new and viciously stratified society, A pyramid of power, as rigid and unforgiving as any in the empire. At its peak were the great directors of the 12 directorates, the most powerful eunuchs who controlled everything from the imperial diet to state documents. Below them were dozens of ranks and sub-ranks, deputies, secretaries, record keepers, and administrators, each with his own small sphere of influence, each jealously guarding his position. And at the very bottom, forming the vast, crushed base of this pyramid, were the novices, the newcomers, the boys like him. Within the palace walls, he is less than nothing. He has no rank, no connections, and no voice. He is a creature to be commanded, and his only purpose is to serve not just the imperial family, but every single eunuch who stands on a higher rung of the ladder than he does. His relationship with his shifu is the central pillar of this new existence. This is not the noble bond of a scholar and his student. It is a form of indentured servitude, a harsh and demanding apprenticeship in survival. In exchange for a place to sleep, a daily bowl of rice, and a sliver of protection from the random cruelties of other senior eunuchs, the boy, his tudi, owes his master absolute and unquestioning obedience. His life becomes an extension of his master's. He is the first to wake, tasked with fetching water for his shifu's morning ablutions. He cleans his master's quarters, washes his robes by hand in freezing water, and runs his errands across the vast expanse of the city. If his master receives a gift or a small stipend, the boy is expected to hand over any meager tips or payments he might receive himself. He is his master's shadow, his servant, and his property. The lessons he learns are not of art or philosophy, but of silence and observation. He learns to read the subtle shift in his master's tone, to anticipate his needs before they are spoken. He learns the intricate web of names, ranks, and rivalries within the eunuch community. He learns who to fear, who to avoid, and whose path to never, ever cross. He learns that a direct gaze is a challenge, a spoken opinion is an unforgivable transgression, and a moment of hesitation in carrying out an order is an invitation for punishment. This education is delivered through a constant stream of psychological abuse, designed to systematically dismantle his individual will. He is no longer called by his name. He is stupid pig, or clumsy oaf, or simply you. He is berated for flaws he does not have, and for mistakes he did not make. He might be ordered to carry a heavy cauldron of water without spilling a drop, only to be tripped by another novice, and then beaten by his master for the failure. The purpose of this cruelty is to instill a deep and abiding sense of worthlessness, to break his spirit so completely that the thought of disobedience becomes impossible. He has escaped the slow death of starvation in his village, only to enter a world of immediate personal violence. He has not joined a family or a brotherhood. He has been thrown into a pack of wolves, and he is the designated runt. His survival now depends entirely on his ability to learn the brutal rules of this new cage, and to accept his place at the very bottom of it with a silent and submissive heart. Having learned his place in this new world with the swiftness that only fear can teach, the boy's life settles into a routine. It is not a routine of study or courtly training, but a grueling, unthinking rhythm of physical labor that begins in the cold, dark hours before dawn and ends long after sunset in a state of bone-deep exhaustion. The awe he once felt for the palace has evaporated, replaced by an intimate knowledge of its vastness, measured not in its beauty, but in the number of steps it takes to clean it. His day begins while the imperial city is still cloaked in darkness and silence. A sharp command from a senior eunuch cuts through the cold air of the crowded barracks, and the novices stir from their brief troubled sleep. There is no gentle waking. They rise from their hard bunks, their bodies already aching from the day before, and dress quickly in the dark. The first duty of the day is not to the emperor, but to their own masters. The boy must fetch a basin of icy water for his shifu, ensuring it is ready for the moment his master chooses to wake. He must check that his master's robes are laid out, that his slippers are where they should be. His day begins with an act of servitude to another servant. Once the senior eunuchs have been attended to, the real work begins. The palace, for all its perfumed and silent halls, is a massive organism that requires an immense amount of physical effort to maintain its illusion of perfection. The boy becomes a human cog in this vast, silent machine. His first task is often hauling water. He joins a line of other novices at one of the palace wells, taking his turn to lower a heavy wooden bucket into the darkness and winch it back up, his small frame straining with the effort. Bucket after bucket is drawn, the cold water splashing onto his hands and feet, soaking his thin clothes. This water is for the kitchens, for the laundry, for the endless cleaning. He will make this trip dozens of times before the sun has even risen, his shoulders and arms screaming with a fiery, unfamiliar pain that will soon become his constant companion. Then comes the sweeping and scrubbing of the courtyards. These vast, empty spaces of stone, which look so majestic and serene, must be immaculate. He is given a heavy, stiff broom and assigned a section. For hours, he moves back and forth in a repetitive, hypnotic motion, sweeping away dust, fallen leaves, and the dirt of the previous day. After sweeping comes scrubbing. On his hands and knees, with a bucket of water and a rough brush, he scrubs the flagstones, the chill of the stones seeping into his bones. A superior eunuch watches from a distance, his arms crossed, ready to unleash a torrent of verbal abuse or a sharp kick if a spot is missed. But these tasks, as grueling as they are not the most demeaning. The ultimate reminder of his status comes in the form of cleaning the filth of the palace. He is assigned to the collection and cleaning of the imperial commodes and chamber pots, the gongtong. These are often ornate, beautiful objects, but their contents are the raw, unfiltered waste of the palace's elite. He must carry these heavy containers to the designated disposal areas, trying not to spill their contents. He must then scrub them clean in troughs of cold, foul-smelling water until they are fit to be returned. The stench clings to his clothes and his skin. It is a profound and deliberate humiliation, a way for the system to remind him every single day that his role is to handle the things that the beautiful, important people of this world will not touch. He exists to maintain their purity by immersing himself in their refuse. currency for failing to master this complex performance was pain. The consequences for even the most minor, unintentional mistake were immediate, brutal, and often disproportionate. Let us imagine him, his arms aching, carrying a delicate porcelain bowl of hot tea for his shifu. His foot slips for a fraction of a second on a polished floor. The bowl tips, splashing tea and shattering on the ground. There is no room for explanation or apology. The immediate response from his master is the sharp, shocking crack of a bamboo cane across his shoulders, a stripe of fire that takes his breath away. The lesson is clear. Your clumsiness is a flaw in your service, and flaws are punished instantly. He is then commanded to clean the mess without a single tear or whimper, for a show of emotion would be another punishable offense, a sign of a rebellious spirit. Or consider a more dangerous error. While sweeping a courtyard, he hears the rustle of silk and the soft murmur of voices. A high-ranking concubine, one of the emperor's favorites, is taking a stroll with her attendants. He knows he must avert his gaze to make himself invisible. But for a split second, a moment of unguarded curiosity, he looks up and his eyes meet hers. He looks away instantly, his heart seizing with ice-cold terror. But it is too late. He has been seen. One of the concubine's senior eunuchs has noticed the glance. Now, a terrible uncertainty hangs over him. Will the glance be ignored? Or will it be reported as an act of insolence, a defilement of the imperial presence? The accusation alone is enough to ruin him. The punishment could be a formal flogging that would leave him unable to walk for a week. Or, if the concubine felt particularly slighted, it could mean a quiet death in a dark room, his disappearance barely noted. His life hangs on the interpretation of a single, involuntary glance. This system of discipline was not about correction, it was about control. Punishments were frequently a form of public theater, designed to instill fear in all who witnessed them. The boy might see another novice, accused of laziness, forced to kneel on a chain in the center of a courtyard for an entire day, his knees rubbed raw and bleeding. He might be forced to watch as a friend is held down and beaten with a heavy wooden paddle, the sickening thud of the blows echoing in the silent yard. The purpose was to make an example, to demonstrate the absolute authority of the senior eunuchs and the worthlessness of the novices. The pain was secondary to the humiliation. It was a constant, brutal reminder that they were not considered human beings with rights or feelings. They were tools that could be disciplined, damaged, and discarded at will. Compounding this terror was the arbitrary nature of the violence. The system was not just. A punishment rarely fit the crime because it often had nothing to do with the crime at all. It had to do with the mood of the master. A senior eunuch, having been publicly slighted by a court official, could not retaliate against his superior. Instead, he would return to his quarters and unleash his rage upon his disciple. A speck of dust that was ignored yesterday could today become the justification for a savage beating. A task completed satisfactorily one day could be deemed inadequate the next. This randomness created a state of constant gnawing anxiety. There was no way to be truly safe. Perfect obedience was not enough, because the rules could change at any moment, depending on the whim of a powerful man in a bad mood. And so, fear became the air the boy breathed. It was a permanent condition. His mind was rewired by it. He developed a preternatural ability to sense anger, to read the most subtle shifts in a superior's expression or tone of voice. He learned to anticipate displeasure before it was even felt. He walked through the beautiful, serene halls of the Forbidden City in a state of perpetual, high-alert vigilance. Even when his body was still, his mind was never at rest. It was a silent, internal crouch, forever braced for a blow that could come from any direction, at any time, for any reason. This was the true nature of his service, a life of unceasing psychological siege. This constant state of fear was made all the more potent, all the more surreal, by the world in which it took place. The boy's inner landscape was one of terror and anxiety, but his outer landscape was one of almost unimaginable beauty and opulence. This jarring, daily contradiction was perhaps the most profound and defining feature of his existence. It was not a simple cage of iron bars, which offers no illusions about its nature. His was a gilded cage, a prison whose walls were adorned with such breathtaking beauty that they almost hid the fact that it was a prison at all. Every day, he moved through a world built to delight the senses. He would walk through courtyards paved with intricately patterned stones, past great halls supported by massive pillars of fragrant Nanmu wood, their surfaces gleaming with rich, dark lacquer. He would see the sunlight catch on the brilliant yellow tiles of the imperial roofs, creating a sea of gold against the blue sky. He would catch the scent of rare orchids and blooming peonies drifting from the imperial gardens, a sweet perfume that mingled with the heady aroma of sandalwood incense burned in bronze vessels shaped like mythical beasts. He would hear the soft rustle of a passing consort's silk robes, or the distant melodic chime of a jade bell stirred by the wind. The world around him was a masterpiece, a living scroll painting of perfect harmony and exquisite taste. Then, at the end of a long day of work, he would leave these scenes behind and return to his own reality. He would pass through a small, unassuming doorway and enter the eunuch's quarters. Here, the beauty vanished instantly. He slept not in a private, serene chamber, but in a long, crowded, and poorly ventilated barracks. The air was not filled with incense, but with the close, human smell of dozens of unwashed bodies, the dampness of drying laundry, and the faint but persistent odor of sickness. He lay not on a fine bed with silken sheets, but on a hard wooden bunk with a thin, lumpy mattress stuffed with coarse straw, a breeding ground for fleas and lice. The only sounds here were the snores and sleep-talking of the other novices, the occasional cry from a boy lost in a nightmare, and the scuttling of rats in the walls. The contrast was a physical shock, a daily reminder of the unbridgeable chasm between the world he served and the world he inhabited. This paradox extended to the most fundamental of human needs, food. During the day, he might be assigned to the imperial kitchens, a world of frantic, creative energy. He would see whole pigs being roasted, mountains of fresh vegetables being chopped, and chefs crafting exquisite jewel-like morsels of dim sum. He would smell the rich aroma of braised duck, of complex sauces, of sweet pastries. He would carry these magnificent dishes, masterpieces of culinary art, on lacquered trays to the imperial dining halls. He was an instrument in the creation and delivery of feasts fit for a god. Then, for his own meal, he would go to the eunuch's mess hall. There, he would be handed a simple wooden or earthenware bowl, into which would be ladled a portion of watery rice porridge, or congee. Accompanying it might be a few slivers of salty, pickled radish or cabbage. That was it. The food was bland, monotonous, and measured not for pleasure, but for the bare minimum of fuel required to work another day. He lived with the ghosts of flavors he would never taste, his stomach rumbling with a hunger that the richest kitchens in the world could not and would not satisfy. His duties brought him into contact with unimaginable wealth. He might be tasked with cleaning the room where the emperor's tribute was stored, a vast chamber piled high with bolts of shimmering silk brocade, chests overflowing with silver ingots, and boxes of rare teas and spices from the furthest corners of the empire. He might be ordered to polish the personal collection of the Empress Dowager, a breathtaking assortment of jade carvings, pearls the size of a bird's egg and intricate gold filigree. He would handle these objects with the utmost care, their cool, smooth surfaces a strange sensation against his own calloused hands. In a single afternoon, he would touch more wealth than his entire village could generate in 1,000 years. Yet his own possessions amounted to nothing more than 2 changes of coarse cotton robes, a pair of worn-out slippers, and the sealed jar containing the remains of his former self. He was the guardian of treasure, but he was a pauper. To live in such a state is to be constantly reminded of what you are not. It is a unique form of psychological torment. The opulence around him was not a benefit of his position. It was the very thing that amplified his own wretchedness. Every beautiful vase, every silken robe, every fragrant meal was a silent testament to his exclusion. The cage was gilded, not for his comfort, but to make the emperor's world more beautiful. The gold was on the outside of the bars, for others to admire. From his position on the inside, all he could feel was the cold, hard iron. This was the true nature of his gilded cage, a prison made all the more cruel because it was built to look like paradise. Decades pass. The seasons turn within the Forbidden City, each year a mirror of the last, a relentless cycle of ceremony and servitude. The boy is gone, his memory buried under an avalanche of years. In his place stands a man, his face a smooth, unreadable mask, his spirit forged in the quiet crucibles of fear and endurance. He has survived. He is no longer a novice scrubbing floors or cleaning the filth of others. Through decades of perfect, silent obedience, of anticipating his master's needs, of making himself so invisible and so useful that he became a fixture, he has finally earned a promotion. Perhaps he is now a senior attendant, assigned to the household of a minor prince. Or maybe he is a deputy administrator in the Department of Imperial Utensils, responsible for the vast stores of porcelain and silver. He has his own small private quarters. The food he eats is of better quality. The threat of a casual, random beating has receded. For the first time in his life, he has a measure of comfort, a sliver of status within the eunuch hierarchy. It is tempting to believe that he has, at last, escaped the cage. But this is a dangerous illusion. He has not escaped. He has merely been transferred to a different wing of the prison, one with far more intricate locks and far deadlier consequences. The simple physical brutality of his youth is replaced by a complex psychological warfare that is waged every single day in the perfumed silent halls of the inner court. The threat is no longer a bamboo cane, but a poisoned word, not a missed meal, but a quiet order for an execution. He has entered the war of whispers, and he will soon learn that he is not a general, but a pawn on the front lines. To understand his new perilous position, one must first understand the battlefield. The Forbidden City was not a unified court, but a fractured landscape of competing factions, each locked in a cold, unending war for influence and power. The eunuch now found himself standing directly on the fault lines of these great rivalries. The first and most powerful faction was the inner court, the domain of the imperial women. At its apex was the empress, and often even more powerful, the empress dowager, the emperor's mother. They wielded immense authority and demanded absolute, unwavering loyalty. Beneath them was the vast silken snake pit of the harem. Hundreds of concubines, ranked in a complex hierarchy, all lived for a single purpose: to capture the emperor's favor, and most importantly, to ensure that their own son would be named Crown Prince, the future ruler of the Dragon Throne. Their weapons were not swords, but seduction, manipulation, and carefully deployed slander. The second great power was the outer court, the world of the scholar officials and ministers who managed the vast bureaucracy of the empire. These were educated, ambitious men, steeped in Confucian ideals of family, order, and propriety. They viewed the eunuchs with a deep and abiding contempt. They saw them as a corrupting, unnatural influence, a third sex that had no place meddling in the affairs of state. These officials were a constant source of opposition, always watching the eunuchs, waiting for a mistake, eager to expose any hint of corruption or overreach. Caught directly between these two grinding stones were the eunuchs themselves. They were the only men permitted to move freely within the private quarters of the inner court, making them the natural and necessary instruments for these factions. A concubine wishing to send a secret message to a political ally in the outer court could not do so herself. She had to use a trusted eunuch. A prince wishing to discreetly bribe a minister needed a eunuch as his intermediary. An empress wishing to isolate a rival consort would use her eunuchs to control access, to turn away visitors, and to report on her rival's every move. The eunuch became the living machinery of court intrigue. He was the secret messenger, the keeper of secrets, the spy. He was the agent tasked with spreading a vicious rumor about a concubine to make her fall from the emperor's favor. He was the gatekeeper who, by denying a certain minister an audience with the emperor at a critical moment, could subtly alter the course of policy. He was the eyes and ears of his patron, expected to report every conversation he overheard, every secret glance he witnessed. This proximity to great matters, this handling of sensitive information, could easily be mistaken for power. And indeed, the most successful eunuchs could become figures of immense influence, their favor sought by officials and princes alike. But it was a profound illusion. They were never seen as partners or allies. To the imperial women they served, they were utterly disposable tools, to be used for a purpose and then discarded if they became inconvenient or compromised. To the ministers of the outer court they fought against. They were nothing more than vermin to be exterminated. The eunuch was in the unique and terrible position of being the most essential and the most reviled figure in the entire forbidden city. He was a master of secrets in a world where knowledge was a weapon that was just as likely to backfire and kill the one who wielded it. To exist in this state as a despised and essential tool was to live in a world without solid ground. The greatest consequence of this new life was not the danger of the great factions, but the poison it introduced into his every human interaction. The simple, straightforward fear of his youth, the fear of a master's cane, was gone. In its place grew something far more complex and suffocating, a deep and constant paranoia, a corrosive acid that ate away at the very possibility of trust. He had entered a world where every friendly face could be a mask, and every shared confidence could be a carefully laid trap. In the barracks of his youth, there was a grim, unspoken camaraderie born of shared misery. Here, in the perfumed halls of the inner court, there was none. Genuine friendship was a luxury so dangerous that he could not afford to even consider it. The fellow eunuch, with whom he shared a pot of tea, might be a lifelong rival, subtly probing for a weakness to exploit. The one who offered a sympathetic ear to his complaints might be an informant for the Empress Dowager, taking his every word, twisting it, and reporting it as evidence of disloyalty. Every interaction, no matter how trivial, became a high-stakes performance. A simple conversation was a minefield. If he praised a certain general's victory, it could be interpreted as an endorsement of that general's faction. If he lamented the coming winter's severity, it could be reported as a complaint against the emperor's management of the granaries. Words were no longer for communication. They were weapons, shields, and snares. He learned to speak in vague pleasantries, in non-committal affirmations, to master a form of language that said nothing at all. Silence became his most trusted shield, but even silence was treacherous. To remain silent when a powerful eunuch slandered a rival could be seen as a sign of disapproval, an insult to the speaker. To agree with the slander could make an enemy of the victim's powerful patron. There was no safe move, and so he learned to wear a mask. He perfected a placid, almost bland expression that betrayed nothing. His face became a serene, still pond, beneath which the currents of calculation and fear churned furiously. He had to master the art of appearing deferential to all, loyal to one, and revealing to none. He became an expert in observing the most minute details, the slight tremor in another's hand as he poured tea, the flicker of an eye at the mention of a certain name, the subtle shift in posture that signaled a change in mood. His survival depended not on his strength or his intelligence, but on his ability to become the most observant and most unreadable man in the room. Imagine him invited to play a game of Go with another senior eunuch, a man he knows is a favorite of a rival concubine. The invitation itself is a command he cannot refuse. They sit across from each other at a low table, the black and white stones cool and smooth in their bowls. The game begins. On the surface, it is a leisurely pastime, a moment of civilized recreation. In reality, it is a brutal interrogation. As they play, the conversation is light. His opponent might say, "I hear the plum blossoms in the western garden are particularly beautiful this year." The noble consort Wei is very pleased. It is an innocent comment, but it is also a probe. Is he aware that consort Wei is his opponent's patron? Does he know that her garden was recently expanded by imperial decree, a sign of her rising favor? His response must be perfect. If he agrees too enthusiastically, he might seem to be endorsing her faction. If he seems unimpressed, he might be seen as slighting her. He might simply reply, "The palace gardeners are truly masters of their art," a neutral statement that praises no one. The game itself is a mirror of their lives. His opponent makes a bold, aggressive move on the board, capturing a small group of his stones. Is this a reflection of his patron's recent political victory, a show of dominance? Or is it a feint, a distraction from a more subtle attack being prepared elsewhere on the board? Our eunuch responds with a quiet, defensive move, strengthening his own position without launching a direct counterattack. His goal is not to win the game of Go. His goal is to survive the conversation, to reveal nothing of his own master's plans, and to glean some small kernel of truth from his opponent's maneuvers, all while appearing to be doing nothing more than enjoying a pleasant afternoon. He must lose the battle on the board, perhaps, to avoid losing the war for his life. This is the atmosphere in which he now lives. It is a world of constant, silent appraisal. Every meal could be poisoned. Every gift could be a bribe or a trap. Every friendship is a potential betrayal. This unrelenting paranoia is exhausting, a psychological grind that wears away at the soul. It creates a profound and inescapable loneliness. He is surrounded by hundreds of people, his days filled with conversation and interaction, but he is utterly, completely alone. He is an island of secrets, and the sea around him is filled with sharks. The only person he can truly trust is himself, and on the long, dark nights in his small, silent room, even that trust is sometimes shaken by the sheer, crushing weight of the fear. In this treacherous sea of paranoia, to be unaligned was to be adrift and defenseless, an easy target for any predator. Survival, and any hope of advancement, demanded allegiance. The only way to weather the storm was to lash oneself to the mast of a more powerful ship, to pledge absolute unquestioning loyalty to a single patron. This choice, however, did not bring safety. It simply replaced the fear of 1,000 hidden threats with the single, crushing, life or death pressure of serving that one master's ambition. His life was no longer his own. It was now a wager, staked entirely on the success or failure of another. Let us imagine that our eunuch, through his quiet competence and unreadable demeanor, has attracted the notice of a rising figure in the inner court. She is a young, intelligent, and deeply ambitious concubine, known as the noble consort. She has given the emperor a healthy son, and her life has now narrowed to a single, all-consuming purpose: to see her child named Crown Prince. She needs a chief attendant who is clever, discreet, and utterly loyal. She chooses him. From this moment on, his fate is inextricably bound to hers. He is no longer just a palace servant. He is a co-conspirator. His duties are transformed. He becomes her confidant, the only person with whom she can let her own mask of serene obedience fall. In the privacy of her chambers, she shares her deepest fears, her most ambitious schemes. He becomes the keeper of secrets that could get them both killed. He advises her on which officials in the outer court might be swayed with a well-placed gift, which of her rival concubines is currently in favor with the Empress Dowager, and which of the other princes is showing the most promise. He becomes her spymaster, managing a small, informal network of lower-ranking eunuchs and palace maids who serve as his eyes and ears. He pays a maid to report on the visitors to a rival's chambers. He tasks a young eunuch with noting the emperor's mood after he leaves another consort's bed. Every scrap of information, every piece of gossip is brought to him, which he then filters and presents to his mistress. He learns to read the subtle currents of the court, to see the patterns in the chaos. He is her secret emissary. He moves through the palace at night, a silent shadow, delivering messages to her hidden allies. He arranges for the delivery of a gift, a chest of silver, a rare piece of calligraphy, to a wavering minister whose support they need. He operates in the dark, his every step fraught with the danger of discovery. He is the hidden hand that executes her will. This foundation of favor was as unstable as shifting sand. It could be washed away in an instant, for any number of reasons. A single catastrophic miscalculation could be his undoing. If he advised the emperor to pursue a certain policy that failed, or recommended a general who then lost a major battle, the blame could be laid squarely at his feet. His enemies in the outer court were always watching, waiting for such a moment, ready to present a formal memorial to the throne, accusing him of incompetence, corruption, or of deliberately misleading the Son of Heaven. His power was also tied directly to the health and survival of his patron. If the emperor he served died suddenly, the new emperor, even if it was the very prince he helped bring to power, might see him not as a loyal servant, but as a relic of the previous reign, a man with divided loyalties. A new ruler often meant a clean slate, and the first to be swept away were the powerful favorites of the old regime. The loyalty that had earned him his position could become the very thing that condemned him. Let us paint a final, tragic scene. Imagine our eunuch at the absolute apex of his career. He is the director of the imperial stables, a position of immense prestige and wealth. He walks through the palace halls, and others part before him like water. One morning, he is summoned before the emperor. He enters the throne room and performs the customary prostration, expecting to discuss the acquisition of new horses from the western frontier. But the emperor's mood is dark. A military campaign has gone poorly. A rival minister, a man who has hated our eunuch for years, had an audience just an hour before. The emperor speaks, his voice cold and devoid of its usual warmth. He accuses the eunuch of providing poor intelligence, of consorting with the losing general, of arrogance. There is no trial. There is no opportunity for defense. The emperor's displeasure is the verdict, the sentence, and the execution all in one. He makes a simple, dismissive gesture to the captain of the Imperial Guard. In that single moment, everything is over. The guard seize him, roughly pulling him to his feet. He is stripped of his silken robes of office, the symbols of his high rank. He is dragged from the throne room, and as he is pulled through the courtyards, the other eunuchs and officials who had bowed to him just that morning now turn away, refusing to meet his gaze, terrified that the emperor's wrath might be contagious. His lavish quarters are sealed, his accumulated wealth confiscated and returned to the imperial treasury. The network of allies and informants he spent a lifetime building dissolves into mist. He is utterly and completely alone. His fate is now to be exiled to a remote, malarial outpost on the southern border, or perhaps just to be thrown into a palace dungeon to be forgotten, left to die in the cold and the dark. This was the ultimate cruel joke of the eunuch's existence. He could climb so high, but he had no foundation beneath him. A scholar official had the backing of his powerful, extended family clan. A general had the loyalty of the army he commanded. A nobleman had vast ancestral lands and a hereditary title. The eunuch had nothing. He had no family, no land, no army. He was a rootless tree, and his only source of nourishment was the fickle, conditional favor of a single man. And so, the power he sought his entire life, the power he sacrificed his very body and soul to achieve, was revealed to be the most fragile and powerless position of all. It was a phantom, a whisper, a beautiful and terrifying illusion. He was a king in a dream, and the moment his master, the true dreamer, awoke, he simply ceased to exist. Even for the eunuch who, against all odds, managed to navigate the treacherous currents of the court, who avoided the executioner's block and the emperor's wrath, who perhaps even achieved a position of great authority, there was one enemy he could never outmaneuver, one prison from which he could never escape. It was not a prison of walls or politics, but of flesh and bone. The sentence passed upon him in the cutter's hut decades earlier was a lifelong one, and as he aged, his own body began to exact its slow, relentless revenge. The The political wars might end, but the war against his own biology was a battle he was forced to fight every single day. The most immediate and persistent consequence of his castration was also the most private and humiliating. The crude, unhygienic surgery, performed with a simple knife and no anatomical expertise, almost inevitably caused permanent damage to the urinary system. The result, for a great many eunuchs, was a lifelong struggle with incontinence. This was not a grand, dramatic tragedy, but a quiet, constant, and deeply shameful affliction. It was the ever-present fear of leakage, the need to wear padded undergarments or layers of silk and cotton cloths to absorb the slow, steady drip that he could not control. It was the source of a profound and unending anxiety. Imagine the terror of standing in a silent, formal court ceremony, surrounded by powerful officials, praying that your body does not betray you. Imagine the careful calculation of every journey across the vast palace grounds, your mind always mapping the distance to the nearest latrine. And with this condition came the inescapable problem of odor. No matter how meticulously clean he tried to be, no matter how much expensive perfume he used on his robes, or how much fragrant incense he burned in his chambers, there would always be a faint, telltale scent of stale urine that clung to him. It was the smell of his shame, a constant proclamation of his damaged state. He would see others notice it in the slight, involuntary wrinkle of a nose or a subtle step back. It was a humiliation that followed him like a shadow, a secret he was sure everyone could smell. This damaged urinary tract was more than just a source of shame. It was an open gateway to death. In an era before germ theory or antibiotics, his condition made him extraordinarily susceptible to frequent and severe infections. For the eunuch, the familiar burning pain of a urinary tract infection was a terrifying and recurring visitor. Each time it began, it brought with it a wave of dread. He knew the progression all too well. The initial discomfort, followed by a raging fever that left him shaking with chills, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. He knew that this common ailment could, for him, be a death sentence. The infection could easily travel up into his kidneys, and from there into his blood, a condition we would now call sepsis. He would have watched many of his fellow eunuchs, old and young, die this way, not from a conspirator's poison or an assassin's blade, but from a miserable, painful, and undignified infection that started in the very site of their mutilation. Each bout of fever was a roll of the dice, a reminder of his own fragility. As the years wore on, his body waged its war on other fronts as well. The lack of testosterone had a devastating effect on his skeletal system. His bones grew brittle and porous, a condition we know as osteoporosis. For an elderly eunuch, a simple fall on a slippery stone path, an accident that a healthy man would have recovered from with a bruise, could result in a shattered hip or a broken leg, an injury from which he would likely never recover. His body lacked the fundamental hormonal building blocks for strength and resilience. To this fragility was added the chronic pain of a life of hardship. The decades of hard labor as a novice, of sleeping on thin mats on cold, hard floors in drafty barracks, had settled deep into his joints. Arthritis became his constant companion, a dull, throbbing ache in his knees, his back, and his hands that flared with every change in the weather. The serene, placid mask he presented to the court often hid a body that was a landscape of quiet, persistent agony. This was the final, inescapable truth of his existence. He could rise to a position where he advised the Son of Heaven, where he managed vast treasuries, where powerful men sought his favor. But he could not command his own body. It was an unruly and rebellious subject that refused to obey. It betrayed him with shame. It tormented him with pain. and it constantly threatened him with a miserable death. The gilded cage of the palace was his second prison. The first, and the last, was the hollow shell of his own flesh. While the chronic pain and humiliating health problems were a private, hidden torment, other consequences of his condition were impossible to conceal. They were proclaimed with every word he spoke, and written on the very features of his face. His altered biology sculpted him into a form that was neither fully male nor female, marking him as a permanent outsider in a world obsessed with clear social roles. If his inner world was a prison of pain, his outer form was the uniform of that prison, visible to all. The first and most immediate marker was his voice. Puberty, with its flood of testosterone, never came for him. As a result, his larynx did not grow, and his vocal cords did not thicken in the same way as other boys. Throughout his life, his voice remained high-pitched, light, and lacking the deep resonance of a mature man. In the grand halls of the Forbidden City, where the voices of generals and ministers boomed with authority, the eunuch's voice was a stark and constant contrast. It was the voice of a boy, trapped in the body of a man, an unnerving and unmistakable signal of his altered state. Every time he gave an order, every time he spoke in court, his own voice announced his otherness before the words themselves had any meaning. His face, too, became a canvas upon which his condition was written. He could not grow a beard or a moustache, the most fundamental symbols of masculinity and maturity in his culture. While the scholar officials he dealt with might stroke their long, thin beards in contemplation, his own chin remained perpetually smooth. This lack of facial hair gave him a strangely ageless quality. As he grew older, the lines of time seemed to settle differently on his face. The skin, often softer and with fewer deep wrinkles due to the different hormonal balance, could create an eerie, doll-like appearance. He was a man without the natural, rugged map of manhood etched upon his features. His face was a smooth, placid mask that seemed to exist outside the normal progression of a man's life. The changes to his physique were even more profound. The absence of testosterone fundamentally altered the way his body developed and stored fat. He was prone to a softer, more rounded body shape. Fat would accumulate not on the belly, but around the hips, the thighs, and most noticeably on the chest. A condition we now know as gynecomastia, the development of breast tissue. This gave him a physique that stood in jarring contrast to the masculine ideals of his society. While the emperor's guards were lean and muscular, and the court officials were either slender or portly in a distinctly male fashion, the eunuch's body occupied a strange middle ground. If castrated before puberty, he might also grow unusually tall, with disproportionately long arms and legs, further adding to a slightly gangling, unnatural appearance. These individual traits, the high voice, the smooth face, the soft body, combined to create a single, overwhelming impression. He was a member of a third sex. He was not a man, yet he was clearly not a woman. He lived in a liminal space, a biological ambiguity that was a source of endless fascination, pity, and revulsion for those around him. The palace maids might whisper and giggle at his strange form. The court officials, with their rigid Confucian ideas of order, would look upon him with a mixture of scorn and distrust, seeing his very existence as an affront to the natural way of things. His body was a public spectacle, a walking, talking symbol of a world turned upside down. This visible otherness was a burden he could never set down. A minister could take off his robes of office at the end of the day. A soldier could remove his armor. But the eunuch could never remove his own body. It was a permanent uniform, an inescapable biological proclamation of his identity. It announced who and what he was from a distance, shaping every interaction before it even began. It ensured that no matter how intelligent he was, how much wealth he accumulated, or how much influence he wielded. He would always be seen by the world not as a person, but as a curiosity, a creature defined first and foremost by what had been taken from him. This was the true nature of his hollow shell, a body that not only tormented him from within, but also isolated him from without. But this visible otherness, as isolating as it was merely the outward sign of a much deeper, more profound wound. It was a wound not to the body, but to the soul. In the rigid, traditional world of Imperial China, a man's worth was not measured by his wealth or his station, but by his place in the sacred, unbroken chain of his ancestors. And the deepest, most tragic pain of the eunuch's life was the knowledge that, for him, that chain was forever broken. To understand the depth of this pain, we must first understand the world he lived in. At the very heart of his culture was the Confucian concept of xiao, or filial piety. This was more than just respect for one's elders. It was the central pillar of society, the moral bedrock of existence. A person was not seen as an individual, but as a single link in a vast, unending chain of lineage. Your life was a gift from your parents, who received it from their parents, and so on, stretching back into the mists of time. Your sacred duty was to honor this gift, and the ultimate expression of that honor was to produce a male heir, to forge the next link and ensure that the chain continued into the future. It was a son's duty to care for his parents in their old age and after their death, to maintain the family's ancestral shrine, to burn incense for their spirits, and to ensure they were never forgotten. The eunuch, by his very nature, was a catastrophic failure in this sacred duty. He was a son who could never become a father. He was a dead end. The family line, which had weathered famines, wars, and dynasties for countless generations, had now reached its final stop. It ended with him. The terrible, tragic irony is that his parents had sacrificed his ability to continue the lineage in a desperate attempt to ensure the lineage's immediate survival from starvation. It was a spiritual price paid for physical survival, a debt that would haunt the eunuch for the rest of his days. He carried with him not just his own personal loss, but the immense, crushing weight of having failed every ancestor who had ever lived. This rendered his entire life, in a spiritual sense, almost meaningless. What was the point of his struggle? A court official who achieved high rank could take pride in knowing that his glory would reflect upon his family for generations. His sons and grandsons would tell stories of his greatness. A general who won a great battle would be honored at his family's ancestral shrine. The eunuch had no such consolation. He might accumulate staggering wealth, but to whom could he pass it on? He might rise to a position of immense influence, but his name would vanish the moment he died. His life's work, all his suffering, all his cunning, all his endurance, it would all dissolve into nothingness, like words written on water. There was no legacy. This created a profound and inescapable loneliness, a feeling of being a perpetual outsider to the fundamental human story. The palace, for all its political intrigue, was also a place of family. It was the emperor's family. The eunuch was a constant observer of the very cycle from which he was excluded. He would watch the emperor's children, the young princes and princesses, being born. He would see them take their first steps in the palace gardens. He would watch them grow, be educated, and eventually marry in lavish ceremonies. And then he would see them produce children of their own, forging the next link in the imperial family's chain. He was surrounded by a vibrant, constant celebration of lineage, a world of fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. For him, It was a beautiful, heartbreaking spectacle, a daily reminder of the empty space at the center of his own existence. In a desperate attempt to fill this void, many senior eunuchs would engage in a form of adoption. An older, established eunuch would choose a promising young novice to be his tudor, his disciple, and would name him as his heir. This created a kind of master-apprentice family, a social contract that allowed for the transfer of the senior eunuch's accumulated wealth and property to the younger one. It provided a semblance of continuity, a way to pass on what he had earned. But this was a pale and hollow imitation of the real thing. It was a family built of convenience and contract, not of blood and bone. It was a testament not to the fulfillment a eunuch could find, but to the depth of the void he was trying to fill. The adopted son could inherit his master's wealth, but he could not perform the sacred ancestral rites. He could not continue the family line. It was a purely practical arrangement, a fragile shelter built to ward off the terrifying spectre of dying completely alone and forgotten. And so, the eunuch was condemned to a state of ultimate solitude. He was a ghost in his own life story, a final, silent chapter in a book that would now be closed forever. This was the true nature of the hollow shell, not just a body that was physically incomplete, but a spirit that was culturally and spiritually adrift, with no ancestors behind him he could truly honor, and no descendants before him to give his life meaning. This profound sense of spiritual emptiness was not a quiet, abstract sorrow that he could contemplate in the privacy of his own chambers. It was a wound that the very nature of his duties forced him to touch every single day. For the final and perhaps most exquisite cruelty of the eunuch's existence was that the system that had rendered him sterile then tasked him with being the ultimate guardian of fertility. His life's work was to dedicate himself to the success of other men's lineages, a constant, silent memorial to the one he could not have. As a eunuch rose through the ranks, his responsibilities invariably drew him closer to the heart of the imperial family. If he reached a position of significant authority, he became a key figure in the management of the inner court, the domain of the empress, the concubines, and their children. He, the man who was by definition a broken link in the chain of ancestry, was now made the chief protector of the most important chain of all, the imperial bloodline. The irony is so profound as to be almost poetic. His very sterility was what made him trustworthy, because he could not father children. He could not threaten the purity of the emperor's lineage. His deficiency was his primary qualification. Let us imagine him now as an old man. He is a respected high-ranking director, a man of influence and quiet dignity. It is a peaceful afternoon, and he is taking a slow, deliberate walk through the imperial garden. He is no longer the one pulling weeds. He is now overseeing the gardeners. The air is warm and filled with the scent of jasmine. He sees a group of young palace ladies, attendants to a favorite concubine, sitting by a pond, practicing their embroidery. He sees the concubine herself, her belly swollen with the promise of a new heir, being helped gently along a stone path by her maids. He bows his head respectfully as she passes, and she returns a gracious nod. His role is to ensure her safety, her comfort, her peace of mind, all so that she can successfully carry another man's child. A short while later, he hears the sound of children's laughter. A group of young princes, no older than 5 or 6, are playing a game of tag on a manicured lawn, their colourful silk clothes a vibrant splash against the green grass. He has known these boys since the moment they were born. He was there when the official announcements of their births were made. He has watched them take their first steps, speak their first words. He is a familiar, steady presence in their lives. One of the young princes, flushed with excitement from his game, sees him and runs over. The boy is not yet old enough to fully comprehend the strange, sad nature of the eunuch's place in the world. To him, this old man is simply a figure of quiet authority and gentle kindness. The prince tugs on the sleeve of his ornate robe, asking him a simple, childish question about a butterfly that has just landed on a flower. Our eunuch stops. He looks down at the boy's bright, innocent face, and he smiles. It is a genuine, gentle smile. He answers the boy's question with a soft, high-pitched voice. For this one brief moment, there is a connection, an interaction of warmth and innocence. But for the eunuch, this moment is a beautiful agony. The child's small hand on his sleeve is a reminder of the sons he never had. The boy's trusting, upturned face is a reflection of a fatherly love he can never truly feel. This simple, sweet moment of human connection is also the sharpest, most painful reminder of his own profound emptiness. Every laugh he hears, every milestone he witnesses, is a fresh turn of the knife in that old, deep wound. This was his daily reality. His duties were a constant parade of these intimate torments. He might be tasked with helping to select a new consort for the emperor, a bureaucratic act of managing the vessel of procreation. He might be the one to design the curriculum for the young prince's education, pouring his own wisdom and experience into the formation of another man's heirs. He was the high priest of a religion of family, a religion from which he was eternally excommunicated. And so we see the cage in its final, most perfect form. It was not just gilded, it was lined with mirrors. Everywhere the eunuch looked, he saw his own sacrifice reflected back at him. He looked at the concubines and saw the intimacy he could never know. He looked at the court officials with their large families and saw the legacy he could never build. He looked at the imperial children he guarded and protected and saw the sons who would never call him father. The very purpose of his life, to serve and protect the imperial family, became the source of his deepest, most enduring sorrow. The system that broke him then commanded him to spend the rest of his days carefully gluing together the pieces for another. This was the ultimate cruelty of the hollow shell, to be filled every day with the vibrant life of others, only to be left emptier than before. And so, our long journey through the shadows of the Forbidden City comes to a close. We have followed this figure from the dusty village of his birth to the lonely chambers of his old age. We have stripped away the silken robes and the myths of power, piece by painful piece, to find the man shivering beneath. Now, before we depart, let us step back and look upon the whole of his life, a landscape of quiet and often desperate tragedy. Our story began not in the palace, but in the bleak, hopeless poverty of a peasant village. We learned that the choice to become a eunuch was not one of ambition, but an impossible, heartbreaking calculus of survival made by a family with no other options. We witnessed the foundational trauma of his life, the searing pain of the surgeon's knife, in a dark, unhygienic hut, a brutal transformation that served as his price of entry. And we understood the strange, lifelong burden of the 3 treasures, the preserved proof of his mutilation that he was forced to cherish as his most valuable possession and his only hope for a whole and peaceful afterlife. From there, we followed him into the supposed paradise of the Forbidden City and found instead a gilded cage. We saw that his new life was not one of comfort, but of endless, humiliating and grueling menial tasks, scrubbing vast courtyards and cleaning the filth of the palace's elite. We learned of the brutal pecking order, where, as a novice, he was treated as a slave by his own kind. We felt the suffocating atmosphere of palace etiquette, a world where a simple, clumsy mistake could earn him a savage beating. And we lingered on the profound, daily paradox of his existence, a man living in personal squalor and privation, while surrounded by the most unimaginable wealth and beauty on earth. After decades of this servitude, we watched him rise into a new and more dangerous world, the War of Whispers. Here, we saw him navigate an atmosphere of deep paranoia, where every eunuch was a potential spy, and every conversation a potential trap. He became a pawn in the great power struggles of the court, an instrument used by empresses and concubines in their ruthless games. We understood the life-or-death pressure of serving a patron, where success could bring immense reward, but failure promised a slow and torturous execution. And finally, we saw how the very idea of his power was a myth, a fleeting and fragile illusion that could be erased in an instant by a shift in imperial favor. And at the end of his life, after all the struggles for survival and status, we returned to the inescapable prison of his own body, his hollow shell. We learned of the secret, chronic and humiliating health problems that plagued his days and the visible, long-term physiological changes that marked him as a permanent outsider. We touched upon the deepest wound of all, the profound spiritual and psychological pain of being unable to have a family in a culture that revered ancestry above all else. And we sat with him in the final, tragic irony of his life's work. A man made sterile, tasked with being the guardian of the imperial family, a constant, daily reminder of the life he was forever denied. So we must ask ourselves, when we strip away every layer of suffering, what is left? When we look past the caricature of the cunning, power-hungry courtier from the legends, who is the man we find beneath? The figure who emerges from the shadows of history is not the one we imagined at the start of our journey. He is something far more complex, far more tragic, and profoundly more human. The truth of the Palace Eunuch is a story of almost perfect, unending paradox. He was a man who had to spend his life as the ultimate guardian of fertility, a role for which his own sterility was the primary qualification. He was the keeper of the dynasty's most intimate family secrets, yet was forever denied the simple comfort of a family of his own. He was a figure who could, at times, wield immense influence over the affairs of state, but who possessed no true power, his entire existence dependent on the fickle whim of a single master. He was a resident of the most luxurious palace on earth, who lived a personal life of privation, discomfort, and squalor. He was a student of silent, absolute obedience, who was forced to become a master of paranoid scheming simply to survive. He was a man whose deepest, most traumatic wound, the proof of his own mutilation, was also the key to his earthly career and his only hope for salvation in the afterlife. His life was a constant negotiation of these impossible contradictions. The myth sells us a story of a man who sacrificed his manhood for power, but the reality we have uncovered is that of a man who sacrificed everything, only to find that the power he sought was just another, more dangerous form of servitude. His true story is not one of political cunning. It is a story of endurance. It is in the quiet resilience required to withstand this lifetime of paradox, this constant state of being, the ultimate insider and the ultimate outsider, that we find his real and deeply tragic humanity. And in that endurance, we find the quiet, human truth that history, with its love of grand battles and powerful kings, so often forgets. The magnificent story of an empire with its golden thrones and celestial dynasties is always written on a page made from the countless forgotten lives of those who suffered silently in its service. The eunuch's story is the unseen cost of that glory, the quiet echo of pain that haunts the beautiful, empty halls of the past. So, as we leave him now, let the myth of the powerful courtier fade completely. In his place, let us hold one final image, not the man bowing before the emperor, but the old, lonely figure in his sparse and silent quarters. The day is done. The court is asleep. He sits alone, the candlelight flickering on his smooth, ageless face. He is a guardian with nothing left to guard, a servant with no one left to serve. He is the forgotten echo, a testament to the profound and terrible truth that the highest towers of power are often built upon the deepest foundations of human loss. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments, or simply leave a candle emoji to remember those forgotten by history.